Professor Yakunin, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, many thanks for the invitation and for bringing me here. I am here for the first time, and I would like to start by saying that I am really impressed by the quality of the forum, and let me say that let me express my gratitude to the organizers, and especially if this is for the first time here. That's very good. Express my gratitude to the organizers, especially to Professor Yakunin for doing it, for starting the whole idea, and for keeping it going, which I know is even much more difficult. It's very easy to start something, but it's much more difficult to go ahead with it for many years now, the 13th meeting of the forum. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Yakunin. I have to thank for the first possibility in my life to visit this beautiful island. Last time I was in Greece at the end of June at a conference in Athens discussing the untenable Greek debt crisis, which had developed as a consequence of this country's voluntary entry and continuing membership in the European Monetary Union. This arrangement became an unbearable constraint for Greece, if not a straitjacket. This arrangement is really a terrible thing for Greece. The exchange rate and the other relevant economic parameters connected with the Eurozone membership have proved to be in discord with the fundamentals of the Greek economy. At least I hope have proved. I hope that proved to all rational and serious people. This is, however, not the topic of this conference, regretfully, because we all could have learned from it. The distinguished or would-be distinguished or not so distinguished international economic institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, did not warn Greece from entering the Eurozone. They failed to provide a rational and economically sound advice to this country. I have to ask, was it just an analytical error? You probably expect from me saying that I don't think so. I agree with a harsh statement of a well-known Harvard economist, Richard Cooper, my good old friend, that, I quote, "The IMF subordinated its analytical judgment in the case of Greece to the political preferences of European officials and politicians." This behavior heavily undermined the IMF's credibility. Some critics say that in its treatment of Greece, the IMF did not follow its original mandate, but was used to help save the European Monetary Union, which of course can't be saved, as we all know. This is not for the first time, and Greece is not the only example. We still remember the IMF's misbehavior in Thailand and Indonesia at the end of the 1990s, as well as we may talk about Russia as well as in some other countries. I am nevertheless convinced that a case study of the recent Greek drama would have been a perfect introduction to this session, but I am not here to do it. To return to the title of this session, to be fair, I don't pretend to know or be able to forecast future of international development institutions. This is beyond my capacity. Instead of speculating about it, I want to say very explicitly that I have many doubts, many fundamental doubts about the positive contribution of these institutions to economic development and human well-being worldwide. My views about it are similar to the views of economists who are resolutely critical of the whole concept of development aid. Together with them, I believe that these institutions serve much more the people working in international development institutions themselves than the people in developing countries. They also function as a way of providing a good feeling for the politicians and their fellow travelers in rich countries. My other problem, strongly influenced by my experience of living in Europe, in a country which 11 years ago became a member of the European Union, is how to avoid the danger that these international institutions suppress or at least significantly undermine the sovereignty of individual countries, of member states of these institutions. In this respect, I may be also negatively influenced, spending also almost half a century in a communist country, which was part of the Soviet Empire and due to it more or less lost its sovereignty. We are afraid, and this is important now, we are afraid that something similar evolves before our eyes in Europe these days. Standing ovations, that's excellent. Members of the European Union are also losing their sovereignty. To make it very clear, international cooperation, friendly relations among countries, economic opening up, free exchange of goods and services, and similar issues are principles that are absolutely fundamental and undisputable. I am resolutely in favor of free markets. The question remains, what kind of institutions should be monitoring and supervising the functioning of markets? Who should coordinate policies of countries participating in an international economic system? Should these institutions be built upon intergovernmental principles or upon principles of supranationalism? As is probably well known, I am very much in favor of the first type of institutions and very strongly against the second type. The crucial difference is their impact on the sovereignty of nations and states. Supranationalism undermines it. International organizations exist because the economy is global, but there are sovereign states. It raises, however, many fundamental questions. Do international organizations help to coordinate policies of individual countries in a way which is beneficial for everyone? Or are they vehicles for imposing the will of certain countries on others? Or perhaps vehicles for imposing the will of a global nomenclatura on all participating countries? This is how Bernard Connolly puts it in the last issue of the Journal of the International Economy. He is rather, as I am, rather skeptical about it. In the current global economic, financial, and monetary situation, which he characterizes as disorder This is the title of this conference, of this forum, which he characterizes as disorder and misalignment. The ambition to help everyone is, he says, impossible to achieve. On the contrary, and I quote, in current circumstances, international organizations can only be imposing the will of some countries on others, or imposing the will of a nomenclatura on everyone. I am afraid, both as originally an economic analyst, professor of economics, and as a former government official, that he is right. Real functioning of these institutions, and I stress real functioning, not promises, proclamations, and propaganda, is what matters. We shouldn't therefore talk about international development institutions theoretically, as if they exist in a vacuum, or talk about them in a only in a normative or prescriptive way. These institutions are very real. There are normal people working there, not angels or omnipotent philosopher kings, omnipotent and disinterested philosopher kings. They are guided by vested interests, not by the reason as such, not by the common good, not by public well-being, not by neutralistic scientific knowledge, not by supernatural wisdom. These institutions are composed of fallible human beings. No matter how many first-class economists, Nobel Prize winners they hire, they cannot solve the insurmountable problem of the inadequacy of human knowledge centralized in one place. Friedrich von Hayek's analysis, so well described in his famous article, The Use of Knowledge in Society, tells us exactly and very convincingly that. I am not talking about evident misbehavior of these institutions, which has, however, happened in so many well-documented cases. In a recent article, the German economist Klaus Engelen, Klaus is his first name, not as in my case, Klaus Engelen enumerates the cases of such misbehavior in the following way, I just quote: undermining the institution's governance structures, using political pressure to take away an institution's independence and neutrality, breaking an institution's statutes and rules for reason of political expediency, letting mass conflict of interests erode objective decision-making, losing reputation and credibility among the public, letting institutions be dominated by major constituencies and blocking agreed reforms, etc. There is no easy way to eliminate them. These characteristics are built in these institutions. To use German, it's ein Geburtsfehler für die Deutschsprechende here. The only way, and I have three suggestions, the only way how to minimize their consequences of such mistakes, the only way is to minimize the competencies of these institutions. This is my suggestion number one, to minimize the competencies of these institutions. Second, it also requires keeping them intergovernmental, not supranational. This is the second point. And the third point is it also requires to update them, to broaden their membership and to increase their political legitimacy by increasing the voice of rising economies, by adjusting the decision-making structures of these institutions to the increasing, ever-increasing share of emerging markets and development economies. in the world trade and world GDP. Those are my three humble and simple propositions, which I am sure they can be easily implemented and introduced into reality. To conclude, I see that you are already taking the microphone. To conclude, the international development institutions are here and are here to stay. I am aware of that. Their future, to my great regret, will not be very much different from now. The best strategy for individual countries is to contribute to the neutrality and objectivity of these institutions, and especially to introduce maximum rationality to their own domestic economic policies, so as not to be asked, not to be forced to ask for help from these institutions. That's for me absolutely crucial. This was always my personal strategy in my position as Minister of Finance, Prime Minister, President of a country. My personal strategy, even though I must say that these institutions and their representatives didn't like it very much. They wanted to be asked, because that gives them role, power, meaning. So I recommend to everyone not to ask them for anything. That's absolutely crucial. Let me stop by remembering my more than 2 decades old statement, well remembered in some circles and often quoted. My statement, which I gave in my capacity as Minister of Finance, then of Czechoslovakia, at a World Bank conference in Washington, D.C. I said, I am not ready to pay hard money for soft advice. I think, I must say that famous Milton Friedman dubbed it Klaus law. Yeah, so this is, in my understanding, more or less we can say that this is the summary of my today's presentation. Thank you very much for attention.